Major Evelyn Reed didn't need a fancy call sign. On the dusty flight line of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, they just called her Valkyrie. Not because she was a goddess, but because her work in the cockpit of the mighty A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, was deadly, precise, and impossible to ignore. Evelyn was, simply put, the best close air support pilot they had. She didn't just fly the plane. She wore it like a sturdy 20-ton suit of armor. She knew the growl of its twin turbofans and the thunder of the Ju-8 Avenger cannon better than she knew the sound of her own heartbeat. But being the best didn't mean being respected, especially not by Colonel Hayes. Hayes was the wing commander, a man whose ambition was thicker than his skin. He saw Evelyn not as an asset, but as an inconvenience, a talented woman who threatened his old guard view of command. He made it clear in the way he stood, shoulders stiff, staring past her when she spoke. Her main concern right now wasn't Hayes's cold shoulder, it was the Warthog itself. Specifically, the old battle-scarred bird she called the Reaper. It was due for a critical engine inspection. But the paperwork kept disappearing from the maintenance log. "Colonel, with respect," Evelyn said in his office one blistering Tuesday afternoon, her tone even. "The Reaper's port engine is burning hotter than spec. I've logged it 3 times. It needs to be grounded before deployment." Hayes leaned back, his chair creaking like a barn door. He didn't look at her, instead polishing a brass paperweight shaped like a fighter jet. "Major Reed," he sighed, the words heavy with sarcasm. "The Reaper has flown fine for 20 years. We're on a tight rotation schedule. You're paid to fly, not to critique my maintenance crew. Stop trying to find problems, Valkyrie. Or maybe," he added, finally looking up with a small, cruel smile, "the problem isn't the plane. Maybe the pilot is finally feeling the heat." The injustice of his implication, that she was scared or weak, hit her like a physical blow, but Evelyn just stood taller. Her grandfather had always told her, "Show them your strength in the storm, not in the squabble." She snapped a sharp salute, pivoted, and walked out. The message was clear. She was underestimated, mocked, and now she was being forced to take a sick plane into harm's way, all because her commander was a bully with a clipboard. The atmosphere in the briefing room was thick with the dust of the Arizona desert, and the silence of men who knew a deployment was never a picnic. Evelyn sat at the edge of the large wooden table, her jaw set. Everyone else, mostly male pilots, glanced nervously at her. They respected her skill, but they'd all heard the whispers. Colonel Hayes was trying to sideline Major Reed, hoping she'd stumble so he could replace her with someone more compliant. Hayes strode in, his boots echoing sharply on the concrete floor. He was all starched collars and cold authority. He pointed to the map, a rugged, broken stretch of ground in a faraway, unforgiving land. "This is the target," he announced, his voice booming. "A supply convoy moving through a canyon choke point. Extremely hostile territory, minimal friendly support. The window is tight." He went through the assignment list, his finger tracing names. When he reached the crucial cast slot, the room went silent. "Major Evans will fly support," Hayes read. Then his eyes locked on Evelyn. "Major Reed, you will take the lead strike position. You will fly the Reaper," a murmur went through the room. The Reaper was notorious. It was the A-10 she had specifically requested to ground. It was the one with the shaky port engine. Hayes was sending his best pilot on the most critical mission, but crippling her with the oldest, most unreliable bird in the hangar. He was setting her up to fail, or worse, to not come back. It was a perfect plan. If she succeeded, he took the credit. If she failed, he had a scapegoat for the loss of an aging jet and a difficult mission. Evelyn felt a familiar, cold burn of pure rage, but she kept her face impassive. She simply nodded. "Yes, Colonel." Hayes dismissed the room but waved her to stay. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register that felt like a threat. "Valkyrie, understand this. I need this mission to go perfectly. Don't be a hero. Stick to the plan. If you go down, we won't risk any more assets looking for you. Understood? You're expendable." Evelyn stared straight into his eyes, refusing to flinch. She saw not a commander, but a small, petty man consumed by envy. "Understood, Colonel," she replied, her voice steady as a rock. "I won't let the mission fail. She turned and left, strapping on her helmet. She wasn't flying just for the mission anymore. She was flying to defy him. The long flight to the theater was grueling, but Evelyn felt centered. Alone in the cockpit of the Reaper, she finally felt free from Hayes's oppressive authority. The roar of the engines was her shield, and the massive cannon sitting silently in the nose was her purpose. She monitored the troublesome port engine closely. It hummed slightly rougher than the starboard side, but for now, it held. Her ground commander, a quiet, professional voice named Maverick, finally came over the secure line. "Valkyrie, we have eyes on the convoy. It's moving fast. Prepare for ingress." Evelyn banked the heavy plane, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat. Down below, the landscape was a blur of hostile rock and desperate movement. She saw the dust trails, the convoy, and she saw the flashes of enemy fire already trying to track her support plane, Major Evans. "Roger, Maverick. Initiating attack run. Time on target, 3 minutes," she confirmed. She descended, pushing the Reaper lower than any sane pilot should, turning the plane into a missile of justice. The enemy fire became a flurry of orange streaks rising toward her. Her heart hammered, but her hands were like steel on the controls. She wasn't thinking about Hayes or the faulty engine. She was only thinking about protecting the men and women on the ground. Breathe. Steady. Compensate for the drag. She lined up the target. The ground was rushing up fast. She squeezed the trigger. The sound was not just a sound. It was a physical force. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the magnificent, terrifying heart of the A-10, ripped the air apart. It was the sound of an entire railway car of ammunition being unleashed in a single devastating burst. The convoy shattered. Vehicles exploded, the dust cloud swallowing the wreckage. It was a perfect strike. She pulled the A-10 up hard, the G's crushing her chest, but she made it. "Mission accomplished, Maverick," she radioed, adrenaline pumping. Convoy neutralized. "We are RTB. She had done the impossible." The mission was a complete success, achieved in a damaged aircraft against brutal odds. She had won. As Evelyn climbed back toward safe altitude, breathing a sigh of relief, the Reaper suddenly gave a sickening cough. It wasn't the steady vibration of a powerful jet. It was a nasty, grinding shudder. The port engine. It had finally given up. She fought the immediate yawing moment, wrestling with the controls. But the bad luck wasn't done with her. As the failing engine spat fire, it created a perfect thermal signature. A split second later, the missile warning system screamed, a high-pitched, insistent shriek of impending doom. "Sam, launch! Sam, launch!" Major Evans yelled over the radio, his voice cracking with fear. Evelyn jinked the massive Warthog hard, dumping countermeasures, pushing the airframe beyond its safe limits. She was too low, too heavy, too slow. She heard the roar, followed by a thunderous, ripping explosion. It wasn't the clean blast of a missile hitting a target. It was the sound of metal being torn to shreds. The cockpit lights flickered violently. A massive hole was blown clean through the starboard wing, and the rear stabilizer was gone. Fluid pressure gauges instantly dropped to 0. The controls went slack in her hands. "Mayday, mayday! Taking heavy damage, flight control surfaces are compromised!" Evelyn yelled into the radio, the cockpit filling with smoke and the smell of burning jet fuel. She wrestled the stick, trying to gain a single foot of altitude, fighting for her life. "Valkyrie, state your status." It was Hayes's voice, cold and distant, already sounding like a recording. "Colonel, I'm losing power. Port engine is gone. Control systems." Her voice was cut short by a final desperate explosion of internal hydraulics. The radio went dead. The entire jet tumbled, plummeting into a dense column of black smoke. Back at the base, the blip representing the Reaper vanished from the command screen. Colonel Hayes, standing over the radar display, didn't flinch. He cleared his throat and looked at the stunned operations crew. "Major Reed is lost. She failed to follow emergency protocols. No rescue assets will be launched. Do not waste resources." They'd never see her again. The command center was a tomb. The air crackled with unspoken dissent. The ground crew chiefs and maintenance techs, the ones who had actually worked on the Reaper and knew Evelyn, stood frozen. They knew the truth. The failure wasn't a pilot's mistake. It was a maintenance failure, and Hayes had signed off on the danger. The young airman who had worked closest with Evelyn, a mechanic named Luis, stared at the blank screen. He felt sick, knowing her last request for a grounded jet had been ignored. He bit back the fury that threatened to spill out. Hayes, meanwhile, moved with the chilling efficiency of a man covering his tracks. He issued the formal loss report, citing pilot error and catastrophic systems failure due to external factors. His cold declaration, they'd never see her again, was now cemented as the official line. He even took a moment to remind the staff that Major Reed's aggressive flying style was always a risk. He was already composing the brief statement to her family in his head, making sure it contained no hint of military negligence. For Evelyn's colleagues, a silent grief settled in. They lost a friend and a phenomenal pilot, and they knew her sacrifice was being instantly tarnished by a cowardly commander. The maintenance reports she had filed were now missing from the digital logs, wiped clean. The base returned to a forced mechanical rhythm. Everyone treated the event like the loss of equipment, not the loss of a human life. Hayes ensured it. He felt a secret, bitter relief. The problem was solved. The ambitious woman was gone. His command was secure. But far away, beneath the smoking columns of a canyon in a hostile land, something impossible was stirring. The crumpled, perforated husk of the Reaper lay momentarily still, but inside, Major Evelyn Reed was fighting through the darkness and the pain. She was bleeding, bruised, and surrounded by the wreckage that had been her cockpit. But she was alive. Evelyn wasn't dead. The A-10, true to its nickname, was the toughest hunk of metal ever built. The blast had ripped the plane, not broken it. The dual titanium bathtub around her seat, the protection that made the Warthog famous, had saved her life. She was battered. The smoke stung her eyes, and her left arm was definitely broken. But her will was untouched. She could hear the distant, muffled sound of enemy vehicles approaching. She had seconds. She ignored the agony in her side and began the methodical, impossible task of recovery. The primary flight controls were gone, severed by the missile. The port engine was a melted ruin. Only the starboard engine, thanks to the A-10's spaced-out architecture, was still sputtering a weak, uneven thrust. Her training took over, a cold, hard focus that surpassed fear. The Warthog had a manual reversion system, cables and cranks like a bicycle brake system, to bypass the hydraulics. She fumbled with the handles, thick and heavy, pulling them into position one-handed. It was a brutal, physical process, demanding impossible strength from her broken body. If Hayes thinks I'm dead, he's wrong. If he thinks I'm expendable, I'll prove him a liar. Finally, with a tremendous, sickening grind of metal, she felt a rudimentary, stiff connection to the rudder and ailerons. She cranked the throttle on the single-good engine. The shredded A-10, the plane Hayes had knowingly put her in, coughed, groaned, and began to move. It wasn't flying. It was a controlled, violent skid, tearing across the rocky earth. Then, with a final, desperate surge of power from the one functioning jet, the plane lurched. The air caught the remaining surfaces, and the Reaper, half a plane, a smoking, jagged relic, clawed its way back into the sky. It was a miracle of engineering and a testament to the pilot's sheer, unbreakable grit. She was flying on one engine, one good arm, and a wing that was more whole than aluminum. She was coming home. Back at Davis-Mont, then, the operations room was quiet, the silence broken only by the hum of the radar. Colonel Hayes was in his office, reviewing the paperwork to finalize Evelyn's pilot error report. Suddenly, a young radar tech gasped, leaning forward, wiping his eyes as if he'd hallucinated. "Sir, Commander! We have an unscheduled contact on a vector from the AO. It's squawking a friendly IFF code." Hayes walked over, irritated. "Impossible. Must be a glitch. Wipe the screen and run a diagnostic. Nothing is coming back from that sector." But the blip was steady, unmistakable. It was moving too slowly, too erratically for a functioning jet, but it was moving toward the base. Another technician, older and more experienced, shouted, "Commander, the signal is intermittent. Wait, I'm getting a match on the transponder. It's Major Reed's plane. It's the Reaper." A wave of disbelief, then a frantic, almost religious awe swept through the room. Hayes stared at the screen, his face draining of color. The impossible was happening. Evelyn, fighting the controls, finally broke free of the dense smoke, the shredded warthog wobbling through the clear desert air. The base lights, her small town's lights, were visible ahead, a beacon of justice. She called in, her voice ragged and weak but firm. "Davis Mountain Tower, this is Valkyrie. Requesting immediate emergency landing. I am critical, but I am home." The crew on the ground rushed to the runway. They saw it then, not a plane, but a monstrous broken bird, leaking fluid and trailing smoke, its wing mangled like ripped paper, the nose cannon intact but blackened by fire. It defied every law of physics and flight. Evelyn set it down, not smoothly, but hard, scraping metal, a furious declaration of survival. The warthog skidded, finally shuddered to a stop, enveloped in smoke. As the fire crew rushed in, they found Evelyn, unconscious but breathing, her hand still locked around the manual controls. She had flown a ghost home. The medics swarmed the Reaper, pulling Major Reed free and rushing her to the hospital. But the pilot wasn't the only thing that had returned. As the crash investigators examined the wreck, they found the flight data recorder, a titanium box that had survived the catastrophic hit and the fiery landing. More importantly, they recovered the cockpit voice recorder, which included the final frantic moments before the crash. Colonel Hayes tried to block the analysis, claiming the recorders were compromised by the damage. But the technicians, led by Airman Luis, stood their ground. They were fiercely loyal to Evelyn now. The truth they knew was on those tapes. When the reports came back, they were damning. The flight recorder confirmed Evelyn's claims, a critical failure in the port engine's fuel line, exactly where she had reported faulty maintenance. The voice recorder confirmed the full story. It contained Evelyn's calm, professional reporting, followed by the sound of the explosion and then, most crucially, a clear audio fragment of Colonel Hayes's voice, dismissing her immediate distress call and then issuing the cruel, career-ending directive to the ops team. They'd never see her again. The evidence was undeniable. Hayes hadn't just been negligent. He had knowingly jeopardized a pilot's life and then abandoned her, all to protect his own position and cover up his petty prejudice. A full investigation followed swiftly. Evelyn, healing in the base hospital, didn't need to speak a single word. Her shredded A-10, the impossible flight home, and the damning recording spoke for her. Colonel Hayes was immediately relieved of command, escorted off the base, facing charges of negligence and conduct unbecoming an officer. His career, built on a foundation of cold dismissal and ambition, was instantly, publicly shattered. The injustice was laid bare. Evelyn Reed, the Valkyrie who had been mocked, underestimated, and left for dead, had not only completed her mission, but she had flown her truth home. She earned more than respect. She earned justice. And the day she finally walked out of the hospital, the entire base, led by the maintenance crew, stood at attention, saluting the pilot who defied death and brought the truth home through the fire. The warthog, broken but victorious, became a legend.